But let's cross to Edinburgh now and speak to Francine Love, who's a volunteer from the Edinburgh Republic Group. Francine, morning.
Good morning.
You were listening to that conversation there.
Yes, I heard
with
that,
Mike.
Yep.
Is Charles your king?
Listen, I don't think the monarchy has legitimacy, so I don't view Charles as a legitimate king, as a monarch. And I watched what happened in Australia. I've seen it several times. I disagree with Mike. I certainly didn't think it was a rampage. I thought it was essentially, a peaceful protest. And although it's in Australia, it's very different. I do understand where that protest came from. I understand the frustration behind it. Charles is essentially, he's unelected. He's very out of touch. I think, it's almost impossible for him to understand the issues that ordinary people face, and he's unaccountable. And for me, that just means that the monarchy completely lacks legitimacy. It's time to leave it in the past and to move forward. Well, I think with an elected head of state.
He was accountable in 1999, and the royal family were accountable in 1999 in that referendum, and Australians decided to keep the monarchy. Sure,
and that's a fair point. However, it was 25 years ago. In the most recent poll, I believe that 40% of Australians could not identify Charles as king. That, I think, says a lot. And, we don't elect a government and say, we'll come back to you in 25 years' time. We've got elections every 4 or 5 years, and I feel that's appropriate. If Australians, if Britons, if Scots want to elect Charles as king, then I will absolutely get behind that. That's absolutely fine. However, I do think we need regular elections for our head of state. We can't simply look at this once every couple of decades.
What about the history and the tradition around all of this, Francine? And the economics? The Royals cost us about 100 million a year, but supporters say they deliver much more than that in terms of tourism revenue to this country.
Sure. I think that the tourism argument is one that's brought up time and time again. However, there's very, very little evidence to support it. And believe me, I've looked very hard for this evidence, and I've asked a lot of people if they can provide the evidence. In fact, I would say that the opposite is almost true. I think that actually, if the royal family didn't exist, all of those buildings, all of that heritage will still exist. We're not erasing the past. If people want to come here and open up, visit the buildings, then they absolutely can do that. We know that France, for example, is the most visited country in Europe. It's the Republic. I'm sitting here in Edinburgh. The most visited tourist attraction in Edinburgh is the Museum of Scotland. It's not a royal attraction. I actually think that there's very little evidence to support the tourism argument. And on the subject of royal finances, they actually cost a lot more than 100 million a year. The latest figures put it at 500 million, so £500 million a year is what the royal family cost us, either in expenditure or lost revenue. So that's a significant amount of money that could be spent on other things.
Francine, stay with us. Alan Grant is a writer and columnist, and he's been listening to you and Mike on this morning. Alan, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
What do you think? Has the monarchy outlived its usefulness for us and for Australians?
Well, first of all, it's really up to Australians to determine their future. I suppose they're right to have a referendum on whatever they like, whenever they have it. It's not for someone, as you say, sitting in Edinburgh to tell someone in Canberra what they're doing. If they choose to have the monarchy going forward, then they choose to have it. For our own case, I think there's a misunderstanding about monarchy and confusing it sort of with royalty in that sense. I think the institution, the fact that it's so woven into our constitution and is in fact the guarantor of many of our liberties as British subjects, including the right to protest and free speech, it sits there atop the constitution guaranteeing those things. We talk about how our liberties come to us from the Crown and Parliament and from its guaranteeing the integrity of the common law. I think it's fundamentally important, and I don't see other countries around the world that have gotten rid of their monarchies being any more free, more tolerant, more democratic.
What about France?
Than Is it more free, more tolerant, more democratic than the UK? I don't think it is. I think you'd probably find it's easier for me to come on radio or go in print and say whatever I like than it is, say, in France, or certainly on an equal basis.
Francine, what about that point? It's the guarantee of our freedoms in a way that a republic can never be.
I would really question whether that's the case. I think a lot of people would take issue with that. We can see our democratic rights being slowly eroded, and that's happening particularly in England and Wales. We've got Republic protesters who were arrested for peaceful protest. We've got climate change protesters who are currently sitting in jail for simply having a conversation. We've got the organisation Liberty, who are currently taking the government to court over the erosion of democratic rights.
But given all that, the majority of people still support the monarchy in this country, Francine, despite all that.
And, as I said before, if Charles wants to stand for election and the majority of people support him, then I think he will have legitimacy. But at the moment, he lacks that legitimacy because he's not stood for election and nobody has voted him in. And, Sorry, carry on. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah. On that, I was simply going to say I think that as an office, it lacks scrutiny and accountability as well, and that's really important.
Alan, what do you say?
I would say that the items that the other guest has mentioned, it's elected politicians that are taking the rights away. It's politicians that are clamping down on it, and I fail to see how adding another layer of politician to that would make it any better. I think you're perhaps talking about the nature of those politicians, but by just simply adding another layer of democracy on top of it, I don't see how that's going to make a difference in those terms.
Do you think the monarchy needs to change or modernise in any way, Alan?
It's interesting. There's two aspects to this, I think. I think there needs to be a better sort of level of understanding of exactly how it works within our constitution. I think there needs to be a better understanding publicly of the difference between being a monarchist and being a royalist. But I think in practical terms, it could also use perhaps a little bit of slimming down. I think there's maybe to borrow a great phrase from Scots, hangers-on, that people aren't massively concerned with, particularly in the royal family. But again, it's an overlapping, but it's a distinct subject from the crown and from the monarchy, and I think that's where we maybe do ourselves a little injustice by not being as read up, all of us, on the way our constitution works. I think it's something that should perhaps start in schools, like in terms of having civics classes, talking about how Parliament works, how the crown works within it, the role of the monarch. All this kind of thing. I think there's an unfortunate slide in the public understanding of itself, and it leads to this conflation of the personalities and the celebrities of monarchy of royalty. See, I've just done it there myself. The personalities of royalty versus the way the monarchy works within our constitution and the role of the crown within it.
Fascinating discussion. Alan Grant, writer and columnist, and Francine Love from the Edinburgh Local Group. Thanks so much for your time.